Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and on today's episode, a topic that always brings a smile to my face, and that is pieces of essential overlanding equipment that I don't actually bring with me or that I've never used when I go on my big expeditions. So I just did some Googling. There are so many blogs and so many YouTube videos now about all the essential equipment that you need. And I always get a bit of a smile because I look down the list and I think, wow, I've never even needed that. So in this video, I'll run through 5 things that I don't use that people are always a bit surprised about. So stick around, we'll get into the details right now. So the first piece of gear that I don't have with me that people are a bit surprised about is I don't have an inverter as part of my electrical system. So a quick bit of background, an inverter is an electrical device and it will convert the 12 volts that your vehicle has with its battery and its alternator. It'll convert that 12 volts into the regular outlet that you have in your house, 110 volts AC if you're in North America or 240 volts if you're in Australia. But it basically just means you can plug in electrical appliances into what looks like a regular outlet, but it will actually be running off your car's battery or the alternator when the engine's running, or solar if you happen to have solar. But anyway, I don't have one of these things. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. One of them is that I think inverters are really inefficient when they convert electricity. They waste some, they're heavy, they take up additional space. And more than that, the reason I really don't like them is because they're a single point of failure. Inverters then, in North America, they're easy enough to buy. Once you get into Central America, if you're in Africa, they're not a common thing that you can buy. So if you're relying on one to charge your cameras or your laptops or whatever, if it breaks, which let's face it, tens of thousands of miles in extremely bumpy and dusty and hot conditions, inverters do often break. I've seen many overlanders stranded without one. You're not going to be easily replace it. So for that reason, I prefer not to have one at all. And what I do is I just run everything I have directly off 12 volts. So how do I do that? For example, to charge batteries, I just have this little battery charger and I cut the plug off the end and just plug it straight into 12 volts because that's the input voltage that it needed anyway. And this one is so old, it's got duct tape on it. I actually took this from Alaska to Argentina and all the way around Africa, and I feel pretty certain it's going to come with me on my next trip as well. So that charges my AA and AAA batteries. For my laptop, I bought off Amazon a voltage converter. So this converts 12 volts that the Jeep or the solar panels put out into 19 point something volts, which is actually what my Apple laptop needs. And it has the little magnetic connector on the end for the Apple laptop. So I can just charge my laptop directly. If I'm parked in the sun, the solar panels are great. If the engine's running, no problem. I do have to be a bit careful though. The laptop uses a lot of power, and if I'm parked and it's in the evening, I don't want to charge the laptop for more than maybe half an hour. Otherwise I'll start draining down my reserve battery. I have to be careful of that. But safe to say, I run everything I have directly off 12 volts. I charge my cameras, I charge my fan, and it just helps me cull things out too. If it can't be run on 12 volts, then I'm not bringing it with me. It's as simple as that. The next item that I always see on overlanding lists is the must that you have to bring additional fuel. And I always back right up and I straight away say, hang on a minute, where are you actually going? So it turns out if you're staying around in North America, even if you're going all the way up to the Arctic Ocean, you're exploring all of Death Valley, all over the place, you only need a range of 300 miles. That in fact is more than enough. So the little Jeep that I drove from Alaska to Argentina, it would get 350 to a tank if I was driving carefully. And that was enough for the entire expedition, except when I crossed the salt flats of Bolivia, when I just bought a container from some locals, used it for that trip and then gave it away again. So instead of carrying jerry cans for the entire expedition, I just got one for the one little segment where I actually needed it. So whenever I see lists that say you have to bring additional fuel, just slow way down and think about it. Where are you actually going? And if your vehicle gets less than 300 miles to a tank, I have to start to wonder, have you done something to your vehicle that is making that happen? And your trip's going to be so expensive, I don't even know if it's viable to take that vehicle. So for me, when people say additional fuel is a must, now I shake my head. And yes, I do have additional fuel on this vehicle because of where I was going in Africa. But I do want to be really clear here. Of the 54,000 miles that I drove over 3 years, I would say that additional tank was only full maybe 20 or 30 times for the entire trip, maybe a few thousand miles of the 54,000. So the very vast majority of days, I drove around with it completely empty. In fact, when I drove up to the Yukon and up into the Arctic Circle this past fall, it was empty the whole time. When I drove through Death Valley in 2019, it was empty. More often than not, when I'm going places, that tank is actually empty, and I only fill it up after I've done some research and I realize I'm going somewhere really remote and I need it. So before you lash out and buy some rotor packs or some really fancy jerry cans and some way to carry them, have a think about, do you actually need them? The next thing on my list that I see that I've never needed is a roof rack. And this always shows up as like an essential item. And again, I want you to really think about, do you actually need it and what are you going to put on the roof rack? And I'm not saying that roof racks are dumb and nobody should have one. You know, I have a pop-up roof, which is sort of the same as a roof rack and a rooftop tent. So if you're doing that, yeah, absolutely. But what I want you to think about, are you planning to put jerry cans on that roof rack? Are you planning to put water containers? Are you planning to put a spare tire on that roof rack? If you're planning any of those things on your roof rack, I highly, highly recommend you reconsider and you don't do that. You don't want that much weight up high. And I know myself, I know how I operate. My brother always likes to say, the goldfish fills the bowl. And what that means is, if I have additional storage space, I know I'm going to fill it up just because. Not necessarily because I need it, just because it's there. So if I did have a roof rack, guaranteed there would wind up being some sort of box on that rack, and that box would wind up full of stuff. Probably stuff that I don't even have with me right now, just stuff for the sake of stuff. So be really careful. A roof rack, yes, it gives you more storage space, and while that seems like a good thing, it can also be a very bad thing. The next item on my list that, again, it's on everyone's essential list, but I've never had it, is it's a satellite phone and or a radio. And again, I really want you to think about, where are you going that you're actually going to need this? If you're roaming up to Alaska between the months of June and October, I can tell you there are thousands of vehicles on the Alaska highway each and every day. So if you have a problem, you're not going to need a satellite phone to try and get someone to help you. You're certainly not going to need a radio. Even if you're heading into Death Valley, like the Lippincott Mine Road or something, I mean, other vehicles drive that road, they're coming along. Yes, maybe you'll end up waiting a day, but if you've got a good overland vehicle, you've already got food and water anyway. So I don't think a satellite phone is really that essential. And especially with a radio, not everyone driving these roads even has a radio. So it's not like you're just going to be able to pick up your radio and say, hey, who's out there who can come and get me and come and help me? So before you load up again on a radio or a sat phone, have a really good think about if you're actually going to need it. And chances are that you actually don't. And obviously, if your adventures go further and further remote more and more and you get experience, then yes, maybe you do want one to go into those crazy remote places. But I'm willing to bet, especially when you're starting out, you don't need them. And the final thing that I don't carry with me is any fancy way to air down my tires. And I know there's a bunch of different gadgets on the market and they supposedly make it faster and easier. But again, I always wonder, do you need to make it faster? Why don't you just enjoy where you are, have a drink of water and wait those extra 3 minutes to air your tires down? I always worry if I had some little gadget for that, I would just eventually lose that gadget and then I'd be annoyed that I wasted my money. So what do I actually use? I just have a really old school tire pressure gauge, and it has that little bump on the side of it that is perfect for letting air out of the tires. And actually, before I had this one, I would always just pick up a little pebble or even a stick and just use that on the valve to let the air out. And a lot of people have like the digital tire pressure gauge on the end of their compressor hose. And yeah, they look kind of cool, but they take up a lot of space. And what concerns me even more is they use batteries. And again, you're in the middle of nowhere, the batteries go flat. Oh, now that's a problem. This guy, no batteries, nothing to wear out, nothing to go wrong. I feel like I'm gonna have this for another 10 years. It's simple and it works. It's all you need. Fancy gadgets? Nah, nobody needs those. So I hope that video has been helpful, and I hope once again it helps you realize there are many different ways to go about this overlanding idea, and you don't have to just follow a pre-approved checklist that somebody else has come up with. And remember too, if you're planning to roam around your home state, or even if you're going up to Alaska, that's not necessarily the type of expedition that warrants 4 jerry cans of gas and 2 spare tires and, enough equipment to outfit an expedition to Mars. You just need a good vehicle, some good camping equipment, and that's it. You can hit the road and have a grand adventure. That's how the very vast majority of people are doing it. And so they're not spending tons of money on all the gear. They're saving that money for gas in the tank and therefore adventures. So I hope it's been helpful. If it has, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching. New videos every Monday and Thursday. And so until next time, stay safe out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.